In 2020, something strange happened. A company selling a very expensive exercise bike suddenly looked like one of the biggest winners in the world. That company was Peloton. Its product was more than a bike. A large screen sat in front of the rider, connecting them to live and recorded fitness classes. Customers could also pay for a monthly subscription to use the service. And then the world changed. Gyms and other places where people normally exercise were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. While millions of people were spending much more time at home, Peloton was already built for home fitness. Suddenly, that looked like a huge advantage. By the end of fiscal 2020, Peloton had more than 3.1 million members, and its yearly revenue had reached about $1.83 billion. But that was only the beginning. The next year, Peloton's revenue jumped to about $4.02 billion. Its connected fitness subscription base reached about 2.33 million. The numbers were exploding. And when a company grows that quickly, one question becomes very important. How much of that growth can actually last? Peloton was about to find out. The idea behind Peloton was actually very simple. Instead of going to the gym came to you. The company combined exercise equipment with software, instructors, music, and a large library of classes that gave customers something a normal exercise bike couldn't easily offer. Peloton had been building this idea for years. The bike had launched in 2014. The tread followed in 2018. By June 2020, the company said it had more than 3.1 million members. Then the pandemic pushed the idea into the mainstream. People weren't just buying exercise equipment. They were buying a way to keep exercising without leaving home. And Peloton's business model had another advantage. The company could make money when someone bought the equipment, then continue earning subscription revenue after the sale. For a while, it looked like the perfect combination: physical product, a digital service, and millions of people suddenly looking for exactly what Peloton was selling. The problem with explosive growth is that it can make a company believe the good times will last forever. Peloton had a reason to be confident. Customers were buying its bikes. Memberships were growing. Revenue was climbing. So Peloton started preparing for a much bigger future. In December 2020, it announced a deal to buy Precker, a major fitness equipment company, for $420 million. The goal was not simply to buy another brand. Peloton wanted more control over manufacturing in the United States. It also wanted more research and development and a bigger path into gyms, hotels, and other businesses. The deal closed in April 2021. From the outside, it looked like the next step for a company preparing to become much larger. But there was a question hiding underneath all of this growth. What if people didn't keep buying Pelotons at the same speed? Peloton had to make decisions months in advance. And those decisions were based on what the company thought customers would want in the future. That made one thing incredibly important: getting the demand forecast right. And demand forecasting is not complicated to understand. Imagine you run a small shop. If you think 100 people will come tomorrow, you might order 100 products. But what happens if only 50 people show up? Now you have products sitting there that you already paid for, and a company like Peloton faces the same basic problem. It's just on a much larger scale. Its bikes and other products needed to be planned and ordered ahead of time. And Peloton itself warned investors that it needed to accurately predict demand. Inventory simply means products a company has bought or made but is not sold yet. During the pandemic, demand had surprised Peloton on the upside. The company was preparing for a future where demand could change again. And that was the bet. Peloton was betting that the huge interest in home fitness would continue. But outside the company's warehouses, the world was already starting to change. Then the biggest advantage Peloton had suddenly started disappearing. The world was reopening. Vaccines were becoming available. Gyms were coming back. Offices were reopening. People could leave their homes again. That didn't mean people suddenly stopped using Peloton, but it meant they had more choices, and that mattered. Peloton had grown incredibly fast during a very unusual period. Now the company had to discover what its business looked like in a normal world. The change was visible in its numbers. In fiscal 2021, Peloton's revenue had grown by about 100%. But in fiscal 2022, revenue grew only about 19%. The company was still getting bigger. But the explosive growth was gone. And that created a problem. Peloton had already built a business, expecting much stronger demand. Now it had to adjust. But there was another problem. Peloton wasn't just dealing with weaker demand. It was also dealing with the costs of being a much larger company. More equipment had to be produced, more products had to be stored, more products had to be shipped, and more people were needed to run the business. Those costs had made sense when sales were exploding, but when growth slowed, they became much harder to carry. Then Peloton made another important decision: cut the price of its original bike that could make the product more attractive to customers. But it also meant Peloton would make less money from each sale, and the company was already under pressure. The machine that had helped create Peloton's success was becoming harder to sell profitably. The boom was fading, and now the company had to figure out what to do with everything it had built for that boom. And then Peloton faced a problem that was much more serious than slowing sales. Its treadmills were raising safety concerns. In May 2021, Peloton and the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission announced recalls involving both the Tread Plus and the Tread. The Tread Plus recall followed reports of injuries and the death of a child. The separate Tread recall involved a touchscreen that could come loose and fall. Peloton stopped sales and worked with the safety agency on the recalls. For a company selling premium fitness equipment, this was a major blow, because Peloton wasn't only selling exercise machines, it was selling a feeling. A feeling that the product belonged in your home. It was premium, that you could trust it. Now that trust was being tested, at the same time, Peloton was facing another problem. It had too much stuff. When demand was extremely high, having extra inventory could seem like a good thing. You don't want customers waiting months for a product. But when demand slows, that same inventory becomes expensive. The company has to store it, move it, discount it, sometimes sell it for less than expected. By the end of fiscal 2022, Peloton reported about $1.1 billion in inventory. Compared with about $1.4 billion a year earlier, the number had gone down, but it was still enormous. And this was the problem Peloton now had to solve. The company had built itself for a world where people couldn't get enough of its products. Now it had to survive in a world where people had choices again. And that meant the next decision would be painful. By early 2022, Peloton could no longer act like the boom was still happening. The company had to change, and the changes were big. In February, Peloton announced a restructuring plan. Basically, a plan to make the company smaller and reduce its costs. About 2,800 jobs were cut. Several facilities were going to close or be changed. And Peloton decided to reduce the amount of manufacturing and delivery work it handled itself. This was a very different Peloton from the one people had seen just a year earlier. The company had spent years trying to build more. Now it was trying to remove what it no longer needed. But the biggest change was still coming. The person who had led Peloton for about a decade was stepping away from the CEO role. On February 8, 2022, Peloton announced that Barry McCarthy would become its new CEO and president. John Foley, Peloton's co-founder and former CEO, would become executive chair. McCarthy had previously held senior leadership roles at Spotify and Netflix. His job was not to recreate the pandemic boom. It was to build a business that could survive without it. That meant facing a difficult truth. Peloton had become too large for the new reality. So McCarthy and the company began trying to change the business around that reality. Less spending, a smaller operation, more focus on the members who were already using the service, and a much bigger focus on making the business financially healthier. The company had gone from, how fast can we grow, to a much harder question, how do we make this work? Changing the company was only the beginning. Peloton still had to prove that the smaller business could actually work. So the company kept cutting costs. It moved more work to outside partners. It reduced its delivery operations. It closed some retail locations. And it eventually decided to leave its own manufacturing operations altogether. These weren't small changes. They showed just how different Peloton had become from the company that had been preparing for massive growth during the pandemic. But there was one part of the business Peloton didn't want to give up: its membership. Because once someone owned the equipment and kept paying for the service, Peloton had a chance to build a longer relationship with that customer. The bike had brought the customer in. Now the subscription had to keep them there, and Peloton kept changing. In 2024, the company announced another restructuring plan. It said the plan would reduce global headcount by about 15%, affecting roughly 400 employees, while also continuing to close retail locations. The goal was clear: make the company fit the size of the business it actually had, not the size it once hoped it would have. That may sound simple, but for Peloton, it meant accepting something very difficult. The company could no longer build for the extraordinary world of 2020. It had to build for the real world that came after it. And that is where the story gets interesting. Because Peloton wasn't simply trying to get back to where it started. It was trying to become a completely different kind of company. By this point, Peloton had learned a painful lesson. Selling more bikes wasn't enough. The company needed a business that could make money without depending on another huge wave of new customers, and that changed the question. Instead of asking, how many bikes can we sell? Peloton had to ask, how valuable is each customer over time? That is where its membership became so important. A bike is sold once. A subscription can continue month after month. So Peloton's future depended on keeping people connected to the service long after the excitement of buying the bike had disappeared. That sounds simple, but keeping customers is not easy. People can cancel. They can stop using the bike. They can choose a cheaper fitness option. And if enough customers leave, the whole model becomes weaker. Peloton had to prove that people weren't just buying the bike. They were staying for the experience. And that brings us back to the question from the beginning. How did a company that looked unstoppable become a company fighting to become smaller? The answer wasn't one mistake. Peloton became huge during an unusual moment. Demand exploded. The company expanded to meet that demand. Then the world changed. Gyms reopened. People went outside again. Growth slowed, and the costs of the much larger company remained. Peloton had to spend years undoing decisions that had made sense when the business was growing at extraordinary speed. That's what makes the story important. The problem wasn't believing that Peloton could grow. The problem was knowing how much of that growth was real and how much belonged to a moment that wouldn't last forever. But there is one important thing we can't say about Peloton. It didn't simply disappear. It survived. By 2026, the company was showing signs that the turnaround was starting to work. In the third quarter of fiscal 2026, Peloton reported $26 million in net income. While adjusted EBITDA reached $126 million, its net debt had also fallen by 70% from a year earlier, but there was still a problem. Paid connected fitness subscriptions were down 7.6% year over year in that quarter, so Peloton had improved its finances. While still losing some members, that tells us something important. The company wasn't simply back to its old glory. It was becoming a smaller, more disciplined business, and maybe that was the only way forward. And that's what makes the Peloton story different from a simple corporate collapse. The company didn't fail because people suddenly stopped caring about fitness. It got caught between two very different worlds. In one world, people were stuck at home, demand was exploding, and growth seemed almost limitless. In the other, gyms reopened, customers had more choices, and the company had to live with the size it had built during the boom. Peloton had to shrink, change its leadership, cut costs, change how it made and delivered products, and rethink what it actually wanted to be. The biggest lesson isn't, don't grow too fast. It's something much simpler, and the world changes. Yesterday's perfect business plan can become tomorrow's biggest problem, and Peloton is still trying to prove that it learned that lesson.